Joining us now for this week's Vibrant Living segment is Morgan and Caroline from our sponsors at Oviatt Gilman. Thanks so much for coming in today, ladies.
Thanks for having us.
Of course. Well, first I'll let you tell us about yourselves and what you do at Oviatt Gilman.
Sure. Morgan and I are attorneys with Oviatt Gilman, and we are with the Trust and Estates Department. So we handle estate planning, trust and estate administration, sometimes guardianships, elder law, and more.
Nice. Well, last time you were here, we discussed estate planning concerns for business owners and how trusts are good tools to be used for that. So I'll have you start off by explaining what a trust is.
Sure. A trust is a legal entity. I sometimes like to use the analogy that it's a vehicle. So it's a vehicle that we use to put assets in, and we have someone called a trustee in charge of the assets, and the vehicle has rules as to how the distributions are made to beneficiaries. And there's different reasons to why you would want to create this vehicle, but it's often a good analogy to use that it holds assets, gives directions to the driver, the trustee, handles distributions, depending on what the person who creates it, what their needs and wants are.
What exactly does the trustee do, and who would be a good person? If you're thinking about making a trust, who should you be thinking in mind of who you would want your trustee to be?
So the trustee can be really anyone you want, depending on the situation, the type of trust that it is. But to use the example that Caroline used of a vehicle, the trustee is the driver. So the trustee is the manager. They manage the assets for the benefit of the beneficiaries that are named in the trust, and the instructions are outlined within that trust agreement.
Okay, so it's really not them making decisions. They're just the person regurgitating whatever your decisions you have or instructions you've set.
And it depends on the rules in the trust. Sometimes
Yep.
the trustee is allowed to have some decision making, but within a realm of, say, a very common one is health, education, maintenance, and support. So if the beneficiary wants to go to a particular school, the trustee can decide whether that's according to the rules of the trust, how it should be handled and can be used for.
Okay, this is a good one. I actually saw on the Real Housewives of Potomac, one of the housewives has put, made plans for the future with her kids, and she put in it that the kids cannot have money that she left for them unless they go to school, they go to college. That's part of one of the rules she's putting in place.
Yes, that is one of the reasons for the trust, is it allows for someone who wants to give something, and it can be while they're alive, and there's reasons to do that. It can be after you pass away, but it's almost sometimes to save the beneficiaries from themselves.
Yes.
So it gives guidelines that, you can have this money for these purposes, and that's a great example to bring into it.
That's a great example, yeah.
So what purpose does a trust serve, and who really benefits from it?
So the purpose of a trust really depends on that individual client's needs, but it really falls under two main categories. The first is probate avoidance, and the second one is asset protection. So by probate avoidance, I mean if you are somebody who owns property in multiple states and you want to prevent having to go through probate in multiple states once you pass away, to kind of save your family some work and expense. And in terms of asset protection, if there's any health or long-term care costs and you want to try to protect assets, as well as protecting your estate from having to pay estate taxes. So those are some examples.
Nice. So were you just naming some of the types of trusts there are, or could you give us some more examples?
Yeah, so some examples, there's a testamentary trust, and by that I mean once you pass away, it comes into effect and is funded. The other one is an inter vivos, or a living trust. So that's in effect while you're alive. And then there's a revocable trust and an irrevocable trust. One can be modified, the revocable one cannot, or there are much more strict rules as to how that one can be modified. So one example, or a few examples we like to use that people can maybe relate to, is Cinderella and Prince Charming, right? So if Cinderella and Prince Charming have a beachfront castle down in Florida and they want to try to protect from having to go through probate in multiple states, they may want a revocable trust. That's the more flexible option that prevents against probate. But if they are New York State residents and they have a beautiful castle here that they want to protect against long-term care costs, maybe they want to consider a irrevocable trust, which is much more restrictive.
Makes sense.
And just to add to that, probate, we do talk about that often, but it's really a court proceeding process. And a lot of people aren't aware that if you own property in more than one state, you're automatically inviting your family to a court process in more than one state. So if dad dies owning a condo in Florida, you have to probate, do a court proceeding in Florida. And if he has a home in New York, you also have to do one in New York. So if you put the assets in this
Trust.
vehicle, in a trust vehicle, you actually avoid both.
There you go.
A lot of time, expense of attorney's fees, a lot more control for your family to handle things. In Erie County, people are often surprised to know that we are the second largest county for surrogates court in the entire state, which means that it has the second largest amount of delays to be able to have access to the asset to manage it. So you're looking at Erie County of a minimum of 3 to 6 months from when you pass away to be able to handle an asset. And some families aren't prepared to have assets be locked up for that period of time.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Ladies, you've given us a lot of great information. And viewers, if you would like to learn more about it, if it feels overwhelming but you're interested and want to prepare yourself and your family, you can visit our sponsors at Woods Oviatt Gilman and have them help you navigate your estate planning by giving them a call or sending them an email or visiting their website, woodsoviatt.com. Thanks again for coming in.
Thanks so much for having us.